Our next speaker, Ms. Ahuna Rudra, Digital Marketing Director and Content Manager at Power DMark. Speaking on today's topic will be email authentication, the missing angle of cybersecurity. Over to you, Ahuna.
Thank you so much, Melvin. So I would like to thank all of our attendees and speakers who are present here today for the session. And thank you to Oman Data Park for giving me the opportunity to present at the Digital Enablement Summit of 2021. Well, the topic that we're covering today is email authentication as the missing angle of cybersecurity in, of course, the healthcare sector. So let us begin with a brief outline of what today's program is going to be about. First off, we're going to talk about what email authentication is and why do we need to implement it in the healthcare sector, assessing the threats that are involved and the risks. And then we will be moving on to the various authentication protocols or mechanisms that you can configure for your domain to mitigate the threats and vulnerabilities. So we are going to talk about the problem as well as the solution around it. Email authentication or validation is a collection of techniques aimed at providing verifiable information about the origin of the email message by validating the domain ownership of any mail transfer agent or MTA who participated in transferring and possibly modifying a message. And the reason why we need email authentication is that in the current situation where emails have become the most potent form of communication, email fraud cases have literally just blown out of proportion. So to broadly categorize email fraud attacks, we can refer to spoofing attacks and email phishing attacks. Domain spoofing is when a threat actor tries to forge your domain name to make emails look like it is being sent from your organization when it really is not. This helps in tricking victims who rely on your services or your company. Now, in the chain of events that follow domain spoofing, it ultimately concludes with a phishing attack being deployed in most cases on unsuspecting victims to steal their login credentials, their bank details, and sensitive information. And this can lead to huge amount of data breaches and loss of financial assets. So there are various ways or several means a cyber attacker can use to trick your users. They can pose to be the CEO or the CTO of your company, termed as the CEO fraud. Your sales support, raise fake invoices, or inject ransomware into your system. This can actually drastically affect your brand reputation, brand credibility, and growth. Most importantly, it takes a huge toll on the email deliverability rate and also impacts marketing campaigns. So recently, medical research personnel in the US and Israel are being targeted by a nation-state hacking group, with phishing emails containing links to redirect them to a spoofed login page. This is actually an ongoing event, so even as we speak, this is actually going on, and security researchers are trying to mitigate it as best as they can. So it has also been reported by security researchers that the healthcare industry is 60% more vulnerable to email-based attacks than other sectors. This is because this may come as a surprise to you, but medical information is actually the most expensive information that is exchanged illegally over the web. Now proceeding to the protocols, of course, which you can configure for your domain to minimize business email compromise and spoofing. We are going to talk about 6 protocols that we offer here in Power DMark that are enlisted here. So coming to the first protocol that we have here is Sender Policy Framework, or SPF. As a standard email authentication protocol, SPF works by enlisting all of the authorized IP addresses that are allowed to send emails from the domain. So if a malicious IP tries to impersonate your domain, SPF authentication will fail, as the receiving MTA would not be able to locate the IP in your SPF record that is published in your domain's DNS. So SPF works by the receiving server, the receiving MTA, performing DNS query requests, more popularly known as a DNS lookup, to check for authorized IP addresses. Now, the next protocol that we have here is the DKIM, or Domain Keys Identified Mail, another standard protocol relied on by major industry players right now. DKIM works by assigning a cryptographic signature to every outgoing email message, also known as the private key, which is then verified by the receiving MTA against the public key that resides in the sender's DNS. When the two keys are a match, the DKIM will pass. else it will fail for the particular email. So DMARC makes use of both SPF and DKIM to authenticate outbound messages. To understand the scenario a bit better, let us consider a case where DMARC is not implemented. So in this case, as you can see, the receiving message, in this case, the email message is simply received by the receiving email server that checks the visible headers to see whom the message is addressed towards. And it is going to deliver the message without validating the sending source, since DMARC is not implemented. So irrespective of emails coming from a legitimate or an illegitimate source, emails are always going to get delivered. Now, if we consider the next test case scenario where DMARC is implemented, of course, for a particular domain, the receiving MTA is going to check for SPF authentication and DKIM authentication. And if either of them pass, the email is dropped in the recipient's inbox. Else it can be either delivered, quarantined, or rejected, depending on the DMARC policy that is configured for your domain. So a question might occur that if SPF and DKIM configured separately for the domain, why do we still need DMARC, right? So this is because while SPF and DKIM cannot address the form domain on their own, here is where DMARC pitches in and makes use of domain alignment. So DMARC validates 3 identifiers, which is the domain in the return path header, the domain in the DKIM signature header, and the domain in the from header. And if either is a match, DMARC will pass for the email message, or DMARC fails due to domain misalignment. This also helps specify to receiving MTAs how to respond to messages failing authentication checks. Hence, DMARC actually invokes control in the domain owner's hand. So all this time, we have been talking about the domain owner as the email sender. For our next protocol, which is MTSTS, we're going to talk about the domain owner as the email receiver instead. So Simple Mail Transfer Protocol, or SMTP, is the industry standard for email transfer used by a worldwide majority, as we know. When it was first introduced, of course, back in the days, it had no protocol to ensure an encrypted transfer of information. So security had to be retrofitted later on. And even then, it uses opportunistic encryption to this day, which means that when a secured connection cannot be negotiated between 2 communicating SMTP servers, the messages are still sent in plain text. Now, the problem with messages being sent in plain text or clear text is that these messages can be easily accessed, manipulated, and tampered by man-in-the-middle attackers. Hence, making encryption mandatory in SMTP was the need of the hour. And that is exactly what a Mail Transfer Agent Strict Transport Security, or MTSTS, does. MTSTS makes a TLS encryption, a transport-less security encryption, mandatory in SMTP, so that messages are never delivered in plain text, which keeps MITM attacks like SMTP downgrade and DNS spoofing completely at bay. Very briefly discussing what SMTP downgrade attack is. So when an attacker rolls back an unencrypted SMTP connection into an encrypted SMTP connection into an unencrypted one by tampering with the encryption command, it is known as a downgrade attack. On the other hand, when an attacker intercepts the MX DNS request to manipulate the sending server into sending the email in an attacker-controlled mail server instead of the original receiving server, it is termed as a DNS spoofing attack. Now, when MTSTS is implemented, there is actually no way to notify you if messages are not being delivered to you. So there can be a problem in negotiating a secured connection, and your email may not get delivered if you have MTSTS implemented. And as a domain owner, you may not be able to know if the message was delivered or not. So this is why we have TLS RPT, which is SMTP reporting, which works actually complementing MTS or together with MTSTS to instantly notify you on issues in email delivery so that you can fix them way faster. So it communicates the volume of delivered messages as well as those that were not delivered at all. And reports are generated in a JSON format, which we, of course, in Power DMARC simplify for you to make them way more comprehensive and very easy to read. And finally, the last protocol that we have here is BIMI, or brand indicators for message identification. Now, what if I tell you that not only are there ways to authenticate your sending sources, but there is also a way to make your brand visually identifiable in your recipients' inboxes. BIMI, what BIMI does is it attaches your unique brand logo to each of your outbound messages so that your recipients can instantly recognize you in their inbox. This helps enhance brand recall and boost your brand's credibility. And just not that, Beanie is also a great tool for marketing purposes. So what we at Power Team do is that we make protocol implementation a cakewalk, and so easy for domain owners by handling the majority of the work in the background to make your email safe again. And we have been striving to resolve various security problems faced by users in the industry with effective security solutions around them. So yeah, that's my cue. And it was a really short time. I really hope that I could cover it all and help you understand what it's about. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am, for your presentation.
Thank you so much, Melvin. Yeah.
If there are any questions from our guests and attendees, I will send it over to you and you can reply back to them.